Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. I think it's a topic which is very timely given the conditions we're in. I would say, a very fortunate event that we have panelists from all across the spectrum. We have buyers, we have suppliers, we have buying agents, and we also have somebody who is probably at the crux of the issue that we're talking about today. So I welcome all of you. In a short over the panel to the moderator, Smita, for this evening. But just before that, as is customary, I'll take you through a very quick introduction to NIFTA. NIFTA, the Association of NIFTA Alumni, is a body of alumni who come from various streams of the National Institute of Fashion Technology. There are about 30,000 alumni now in the last 30 plus years that NIFT has been in existence. They work in a variety of roles across the value chain, across the world. They lead and influence business worth tens of billions of dollars, individual companies possibly of tens of billions of dollars. And they cover the entire spectrum, like I said, from design to management to technology, professional services, education, social reform. And the idea behind NIFTA was to create a common ecosystem for design, technology, and business to work together. The core of it is, of course, alumni from NIFT, but we also have people who join with us on various initiatives who are not NIFT alumni. If you're not a member yet, I would urge you to go to the NIFT alumni website, which is niftalumni.org. Go ahead, register yourself, become a member. Even if you're not an alumnus of NIFT, we do have an associate membership as well. And join in the activities which are essentially focused on groundbreaking projects and mentoring or incubation of new ideas, which can create the direction for the future. In terms of the panelists, since they are from organizations which are fairly large, have senior positions, I would like to put this disclaimer out for the record that the views that are expressed by the panelists in this discussion may not necessarily represent their respective organizations or NIFTA. We welcome a frank, open discussion, and therefore you may hear views which are contrary, even contradicting each other within the panel, which is, I think, a healthy sign of a very healthy debate. So with that, let's move on to the panel. We have a very distinguished panel today. Smita Verma Kansal, who is actually moderating, and Smita will take you through the panel and the subject, which is really creating an equitable fashion industry for the future. And the focus is on buying practices. So over to you, Smita.
Thank you, Didi. Good evening, everyone. And good morning to people from the other part of the world. And so today, basically, apparel industry, we all have been in the apparel industry for so many years that today, when the industry is going through some difficult times, we had been talking, there has been talk amongst the leaders that it's time that we should be coming together and probably trying to analyze and envisage how do we go forward from here? How do we address the trust deficit, which is looking very evident today, and how do we create a more deep relationship between the buyer and the suppliers, and create an industry platform which is more equitable for all the players. So we all know that the retailer and the supplier are interdependent, and there has been many underlying issues around the industry which has developed over the period of time, but it has accelerated and surfaced out more during the times of COVID. So it is imperative that we should be addressing it together and trying to find way forward. So while trying to address the situation, we would also be we have got on the panel buyers and buying agents and the manufacturer, whom I will be introducing in next few minutes. But we're trying to address the perspective of the buyer as well as the supplier. Today, buyers are also going through, the retailers are also going through difficult times. Their stores were closed for some period of time. And at the same time, there has been a change in the buying pattern also. With the e-com and the online platform coming into business, the brick and mortar stores were also facing some challenges, which has been, I mean, these changes were happening, and we all who have been in the industry were talking about it. But with the COVID situation and the stores getting closed down, the financial impact of these situations came more on the forefront. So which has led to some financial restructuring and some other situations which you all are aware of. Now, going to the supplier's perspective, supplier is mainly working in an environment, and they take direction from how the retailer and the buyers are guiding them. So there has been we are already seeing that with the sustainability coming into play, the talks about whether the fast fashion will be the future, or or will we be tilting towards the sustainable fashion? There are which is leading to your reduction in the quantity probably, or smaller quantities and more styles coming into play. Plus, we have got the situations of where we have already been working, we had already moved. If you look at the cash flow in the industry, we had already moved from LC to 80% of the business has moved towards the open account situation, open account terms of 30 to 90 days. Now, with this situation, if you look at it, the orders are actually being financed by these suppliers, and the cash flow is being generated by them till the time the goods are not ready. So, and this is not going to go away, because we have already moved towards a lean financial system. And but what has happened is that in this unprecedented time of COVID, it has left the suppliers slightly unprotected. So when there has been orders on hold, or there has been cancellations, the suppliers were sitting with much bigger losses than they could have ever imagined. So today we are all together here to see this is what has happened in past, but what we need to find out is how do we go forward? How do we have more visibility or more a better relationship, a better discussion between the two interdependent parties, so that we have a more strong future, or a more clearer way to go forward with. Let me quickly introduce you to the panelists. We have Marsha Dixon from US. She is a co-director and professor in a university in US, and she's also a founding member of Better Buying Practices. We have Vipin Vattal from Sainsbury, who is taking care of Sri Lanka and India region, and he also had experience of Bangladesh for interim period. So, and he has been into sourcing for almost 2 decades now. Having said that, let me just tell you straightforward that all our panelists are having a experience of 2 to 3 decades here. We have Devendra Gupta. He is the founding partner of Asmara, which is very well established and known buying agency on the global map. They have operations in India, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and China. Sanjay Agarwal, he is based in Canada, and he is running his office and sourcing from India, Bangladesh, Vietnam, and Cambodia. We have got Anup Thatay. He has been in the industry for more than 3 decades, and I think he has known how the business has moved from the beginning in India probably, and has been the most experienced. He's the most experienced one amongst us, and he has an overall visibility of the changes that has happened. Adarsh Sharan, he has been on the manufacturing side for more than 2 decades, and he is taking care of India and Jordan business. So our panel is very vast, very global, and I'm sure there will be a lot of takeaways for everybody here. Now, going to the question, I would like to start first with on the business processes. We will be touching the 5 aspects here, which is the business prospects, the compliance, payment, how the payment will be impacted because of that, challenges due to quantity reduction, and how the collaboration with welfare organization and the will help us bring improvement going forward. So coming to the first one, business process, I would like to go to Marsha and request her to give us a kind of a statement. I mean, give us an opening point on. She has written articles on the business. So on to you, Marsha. If you can give us some brief on how do you see the business process is going to evolve after currently, and also after the COVID will. I mean, maybe it will go away or not go away, but the situation is that we are, we will not be, people will not be traveling very soon. So, to Marsha.
Great, great. Thank you. Thank you, Smita. Thank you, Devanshu. Thank you, Nifta, for having me join you on this Sunday morning from Texas. But it's a topic that I'm really happy to be speaking about. You know, I've done research and teaching for the last several decades. Sumita's already called out how seasoned we all are. But I've focused on the business relationship between buyers and suppliers in the process of bringing product to market. And I didn't really call what I was researching and teaching purchasing practices or buying practices until that term first came up in 2003. And it was when Oxfam was doing a report that they said there's something going on, there's something called purchasing practices, and they seem to impact workplace conditions. And so we're trying to understand what that is. Me, having been in the industry for a long time, having been a designer, I kind of immediately realized that that's a connection for me and what I was doing. So interestingly, this conversation about purchasing practices, at least more broadly, beyond the buyer-supplier dyad, first focused on the negative consequences to workers as a result of some of the practices that are carried out. But increasingly, our discussions at Better Buying with suppliers and our guidance to buyers, to brands and retailers, really talks about purchasing practices and their impact on business, because that's something everybody can get around, is the need to be more efficient, to be quicker, to be faster. And so how do we do that? So, you know, we really look at those purchasing practices as not only those processes and practices, those day-to-day things that are carried out to bring product to market, as an impactful practice on workplace conditions and on the environment even, but how does that affect business? And particularly the speed to market and the pricing, because when you have a lot of inefficiencies in a system, you're not using your resources the most effectively, if you have redundancies, you know, the manufacturer having and the brand and retailer duplicating work, that kind of thing, you know, you don't have the leanest situation, and you're wasting time and money essentially. So what we've seen, you know, coming from our conversations with suppliers very recently with COVID is, you know, some brands and retailers starting to do more virtual work, of course, because they cannot travel. So there's more, you know, approvals made without sending things back and forth as much. We see increased discussion about 3D sampling. And we also see a lot of discussion about what the supplier can be empowered to do and the approvals the supplier can be empowered to make that just save a lot of time, you know, rather than having to have the supplier review the quality, review the color, etc., and then have the brand and retailer approve as well. You know, why can't the supplier be empowered to approve the quality and color, for example? So it's kind of ironic that over the years, we've had, you know, reports of suppliers who their brand is fighting over, their customers fighting over this 2 cents difference between what, you know, the supplier believes it will cost to make this garment and the price that the retailer wants to pay. And one supplier always told me how it's really strange to be sitting there in an office, say in Hong Kong, having this fight about 2 cents when this whole buying team just spent tens of thousands of dollars traveling there by business class, staying at the Shangri-La Hotel, having nice meals. And, you know, just eliminating that travel could have saved the entire costs that they were fighting over. So I think, you know, we are looking at ways that how can the conditions now and the situation now, because we can't travel, because we need to do things differently, how can we do that in ways that last and that save time and money for everybody? Because saving time and money is going to be the way to, you know, more efficiently achieve collectively the goals of the industry and the supply chain. So we're really trying to use data to get across those points that improving purchasing practices isn't just about, you know, giving up something and giving it to the supplier, paying more money to the supplier, though that may be necessary in some cases, but really re-engineering how the work flows so that it is more efficient, it is more less redundant and leaner, and that it improves the situation for all the parties in the supply chain. And so that's really what our data is trying to capture. And increasingly, you know, with COVID-19, trying to capture even the dollar value of savings from doing so that we can help share with brands and retailers the value of making some of these improvements in efficiency and in our work processes.
Great. Thank you, Marsha. So I think taking it further to Anup, because we are, as you have already explained it, we are looking at changes, and it would be good to know how the suppliers and the manufacturers are envisaging and making changes at their base to keep up with the speed that is required. So, Anup.
Good morning, good evening to all the friends. It's a pleasure to be connected with the best and brightest in the apparel industry. And thank you, Smita, for the compliment. I have no shame in admitting I'm probably the oldest in the group, but all of you, everybody on the panel is very well experienced, and I have had the pleasure of working with some of you closely. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to connect at such a prestigious forum. And NIFT probably is one of the best institutes. And probably when I started working a few years later, one came to know that there is such a nice college around. I wish I could have been there, but unfortunately, I never had the opportunity to have any formal education in fashion or apparel. I just happened to land up there. But the fact is that COVID-19 has changed the situation, and there's a paradigm shift in the way the apparel manufacturing is being looked at or will now be looked at. But somehow there was a lot of signs even before COVID. And to me, it was just a shock that kind of shook the world, and also the reality became clearer. And I think it came a few years sooner, but I think all of us this was waiting to happen. If one was to look at it, there has been an overcapacity in manufacturing and on the retail side. And personally, I have been of the opinion, and I've shared it with few of the colleagues, that at least half the world's manufacturing capacity and the retail capacity has to go away, because there is so much demand. And the rest of the ailments of the industry on both sides have been coming from the fact that there have been overcapacity. Vendors were finding it difficult to get the price they could. And at the same time, the factories were having challenges to fill their capacity. And at the same time, some of the people were getting very aggressive and over expanding the capacity, which was kind of leading to highly unfavorable terms for the factories. Somehow, as I would like to play the victim card, and you can blame me for that, the fact is that apparel manufacturers are possibly in the worst spot ever. They hardly have any bargaining power with the brands, and there is no power they have with the mills. So they end up getting the wrong side of the stick, because they are buying goods on an LC and selling goods on open account, also having to deal with compliances. The brands have very few people on their rolls, whereas being the nature of this industry with too many people, most manufacturers will have thousands of people on their work roll, and they're responsible for their well-being, their payments, as rightly they should be. So while there has been a lot of talk about this is bad and that is bad, I must share that there have been some brands who have totally stood out and meant and proven what the partnership is. I will not like to go and discuss individual brands, but there have been a lot of them. But on the other side of the spectrum, there have been brands who have resorted to, as I like to say, robbery with police protection. You buy on 60 days, you extend the terms, and you go and declare Chapter 11. So the vendors are having to pay their mills, their workers, and it is going to be a big financial stress on the industry. While some people will manage it better than the others, I would also say that most vendors have been financially reckless and irresponsible. And my serious recommendation to the vendor community would be that their financial literacy of the people running the business is of very high importance, and financial governance must be maintained at all levels, because at the end of the day, it is not about manufacturers or entrepreneurs running their own business, because a very large ecosystem is dependent on the manufacturers. So from here on, I would
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Anup. So we would also be, I would like to put a similar question to Devender as well, because from the global perspective, where he has businesses across many countries, what we're trying to understand is that what are the business changes in the business process that you see from the retailer side, as well as how you see the suppliers are preparing themselves, touching across the countries, across the regions, and across the countries on the buying side.
First of all, good evening, good morning to everyone who is who has joined us for this webinar. And I kind of share more or less what Anup was mentioning from the vendor community point of view. And from let's say from a buying side perspective, I would say that COVID has made everything get accelerated. definitely too much of capacity is like, I think all of us knows that 30% of the goods which are at the retail never get sold. So that's the kind of a world which we live in. So I completely agree that the capacities had to, I mean, the total chain had to get had a reset. And the second thing which was always happening was that people have been talking about using technologies like 3Ds, empowering the local teams to make approvals, working more closely with everybody in the supply chain, increasing the stakeholders, because right now the stakeholders are only, the brand and the manufacturer, and we consider ourselves as somebody who is a part of the triangle, and but integral part of the supply chain, which has to take care of both the sides, in an equitable way. So very clearly, I think there would be a very big acceleration now, where whoever is the last man standing, so to say, after this dust is going to settle down, the key is going to be who can do deeper relationship, who can prove that they have the systems, they have the technology whereabouts, they know how to handle and respond to and at the same time give confidence to the whole supply chain that whatever we are doing is going to be perfect and we can be relied upon. And I think that's the biggest change which we're going to see, and that will make a very, very big difference in terms of overall cost perspective also. So that's what would be my two bit right now, and then I think we have a lot more to discuss, and more points I will share from my side as we move along the webinar.
Sure. And going to Adarsh, we would like to know, how do you think from the production perspective, the manufacturers and suppliers should be preparing themselves to deal with the changes?
Morning and good evening, everyone, and good evening to all my illustrious panelists. Thank you, Smita. Starting with what Mr. Tatai was saying, obviously I agree with that perspective and completely wholeheartedly support it. But you see, at this point in time, if you try and put some numbers to it, the retail industry will probably shrink by around 30%, and so will the manufacturing capacities. Now, more than ever, we need to partner this. And this business process, which needs to get faster, needs to get leaner, needs to get more cost effective. Marsha touched upon 3D. Now, 3D is a great way. And we've always, as manufacturers, been told by the customers that we need shorter lead times. We need goods faster. Speed to market has been the buzzword for the last few years. But when you look at the buyer calendars, those calendars have, I would say, more than 70% of the inefficiencies lie at the customer's end, where there are still people working with calendars of up to 400 days. I mean, can you imagine? No. So there is a lot of work that they might need to do, and sourcing at the customer's end might probably need to hold their buyers responsible in terms of how they manage to shrink the calendars so that the lead times can be sped up. It's not just coming down to the manufacturer and trying to cut down the lead times. Now, 3D obviously is a great way to do it. I mean, gone are the days when you wanted a color 10% bluer and 20% redder. All the lab dip approvals, these spectrophotometer readings, all this can be done virtually. And over a period of time, help in reducing costs, reducing lead times. All the customers are now going to be, and they already have been buying much closer to the seasons. But now what is going to happen with these massive inventories that they are burdened with? They're all going to buy a large breadth. So the number of SKUs is going to increase and the depth per style is going to reduce. So all that will also want us to get a lot more agile, adapt to the situation, be flexible. Now, there are things like automation that we've been working on. And now the industry per se, it doesn't look at automation as a replacement for low-cost manufacturing, but it is an integral part of to have a consistent product, consistent quality, consistent process. So the other thing that the industry has been talking about and doing is moving to where the workers are. I mean, we all know the issue of worker migration that we are facing in India today. So with the social distancing norms, I also think that today the industry here presents an opportunity to do things that we in India have never, we've never been able to do, like running a second shift operation, which our neighbors like Sri Lanka do very well. And there is value in cost mitigation, in lead times, in speed to market when we do things like that. Of course, there's a certain ask that we also have from the government in terms of single overtime, creating job opportunities, but that's an entirely different discussion. So while the industry bodies are working working with the government to try and mitigate the risk, to try and work out how we can do better in terms of performance, I think it's a partnership between both the customer and the manufacturer in terms of reduction of lead times, in terms of better collaboration, that we need to proceed further during the COVID times and post-COVID times.
Yeah. So there is a question from Sandeep Ranjan on the similar line. Though we were going to take the questions in the end, so this was relevant to the discussion we are going. So I would like to address that. There is a how do you see the social distancing will impact the productivity and efficiency?
Social distancing, the impact on productivity and efficiency is to the extent that the required skill is not available. And most of the garment manufacturing that we do happens on an assembly line process, or even if it happens on a modular process, but to a very limited extent. The skill availability right now is going to be an issue. And I'm talking now not just about social distancing. Social distancing has per se no impact on the efficiencies or the productivity, but combine it with the worker non-availability, and that's when it becomes a problem for manufacturing.
Great. So I think we have kind of covered on the business process. So I would, before we move forward, I would like to just, there's one thing that everybody is talking about is the social compliance and the work, which covers the worker wages, ledgers, and keeping the records clear. Now with the situation when the business had gone for a screeching halt after when the COVID came into play, and there were almost no cash flow coming in for April and part of May. So how is that going to be? How is the industry going to handle that? And also the work from home. I would like to combine two things together here. The work from home is something that we are talking about in the business from the IT level, and everybody's talking that it's a good way of working. So which is probably being discussed from the white collar job. So can it be extended to the blue collar also, where we have handicraft and trade craft, and then we have the embroidery, some hand embroideries, which can be done probably where you don't need to actually come together and sit together and work. So I would like to address this. My next question would be to Sanjay, where I would like him to address how he sees the business process and the compliance changing in the scenario.
Hi, a quick introduction. OrientWorks Inc. We are based out of Winnipeg, Canada, and have offices in Bangladesh, Vietnam, and we work with brands and retailers and wholesalers in managing their supply chain from these countries. We've done it for 17 years now. Thank you to the DIFTA team to, put this thing in place in terms of organizing this webinar. In terms of what I see here in North America is that there is pain on both the sides. There is, tremendous pain on the buying side, on the retail side, and there is tremendous pain on the supply side. Obviously, we are very familiar with what's going on with makers in India, Bangladesh, and Vietnam. On the buying side, on the retail side, there is massive unemployment. 50 million people are unemployed. Household incomes are down. Discretionary spending is significantly down, and it does not look like it's going to change anytime soon. So there is no real pricing power among the retailers, among the brands, when there is, such mismatch between demand and supply, which is what Anup was referring to. And he hit all the 3 points very correctly. So if things were to improve, I think there's a need to, bring about some balance in demand and supply. And unless that happens, unless pricing power comes back to the brands, and unless pricing power comes back to the makers, I mean, margins and margins, go into P&L, and P&L goes into balance sheet. So it never really fixes the system. I mean, if I look at post-COVID opening, I mean, Canada, I'm here in Winnipeg, and stores and malls have opened. There is no real pent-up demand. I mean, there was pent-up demand for sanitizers and toilet paper, but people were not lining up in apparel stores. So in spite of not buying apparel for 3 months, there's no real pent-up demand for apparel. And that is something that we need to be consciously aware of, that in a world which is economically going to be severely challenged, this part of discretionary spending is going to be hurt big time. So I would go back to what Anup said. I mean, culling of the herd is critical, both at the retail side and on the selling side, on the making side. The bottom 30-40% of the capacity has to evaporate. Balance has to be found again. What we have seen, I mean, a good example would be PPE. If you look at PPE supplies from China, and it seems only China is doing PPE supplies to the whole world now. I mean, they redefined the terms of just about everything in PPE, primarily because of a demand-supply situation which was in favor of them. So payment terms were revised, everything worked on 50% advance, 50% before the goods X factory. There was not much inspection going on. And the whole world seems to be accepting it. So I think, especially since the audience base here is more the supply side, I would think there is need for real fixes in culling of the capacity. And I think Anup also mentioned about financial discipline. What I also see that, there are good and bad players on both sides. There are good players on the buying side, and there are good players on the supply side. And I think it's critical that the good players win in the end. And one of the reasons why the pricing power from the supply side is steadily deteriorated is the availability of easy money. So when you have good relationships with banks and you get easy financing, you don't really care whether you're making money on your CMs, and that kills the good vendor as well. So I think some sort of fix is required, and I guess this has to come from the national governments or the apparel associations in each of these countries to address how this availability of easy money, which really, screws up the costings and makes the whole business so uncompetitive, that has to go away.
Yeah.
In terms of work from home, I mean, our industry was very unique. I mean, it was like work from office and work from home. I mean, everyone works from home in the apparel industry. I worked on the manufacturing side, on the buying side, in the factory in my history. And it's a 24/7 industry. So our industry is very, very well adapted to work from home, because everyone always worked from home on all sides of the business.
Yeah. Thank you. So, Vipin, I would like to address the next question to you. It would be the similar thing. Because you have been so much, had visibility on how the compliances would evolve. Up till now, there has been a big stress on the compliance from the retailer side. And with the current situation, as I already mentioned, it should change. So is there any talks happening on the retailer side, and how do you see it evolving in the coming days?
Yeah, thank you, Smita. And thank you, Nifta, for bringing this forum together. Just going straight to the question. Compliance is yes. I think, first of all, I would want to say what this pandemic has done is not a change. It's actually a mind shift change that will happen. This mind shift change will happen across the board. It has to be supply chain, it has to be everyone. And then only we can make any changes in it. In terms of compliance, from a retailer point of view, I think everyone is in it and we're kind of wondering what changes we can do. So gone are the days where compliance was like, I was talking to a supplier a few months back, and he said in 365 days, they have an audit a day, whether it is from one retailer, whether it is from a different perspective, whether it is for compliance, whether it is for technical, whether it is for sustainability. And that's probably definitely has to change, because we have to come together as a retail consortium and kind of probably nominate one audit body and just do one audit across the board. No ASTM, methods, no CDX is different, no RAP, no this. So we all have to kind of look at having one audits, which kind of covers the element of that compliance that we've been looking at, whether it is wages, whether it is working hours, whether it is the health and safety, which is very critical. And we've seen examples of that kind of in the past in other countries. So if we complete that and come as a retail consortium together, I think that will be a big stretching our hand towards the supply chain to come together and make a huge shift in terms of compliance.
Okay. I think we move on to the payments and the financial health, which is the key for the business today. The cash flow for the business, I mean, people are doing business mainly because of for the financial, and there is a cash flow which is required to to run the business, so which we all know about. So, and Marsha had written a good article on the on this subject. So I would like to ask Marsha to give some, give a talk on what she has written and what she sees the payment terms and how does she see that the financial health can be more openly discussed between the retailer and the supplier.
Great. Thank you, Smita. Yeah, we, Better Buying, recently did research, and a special report was published in early June on payment and terms associated with the COVID-19 situation. And certainly, the industry press has helped highlight some of the challenging terms and situations that suppliers are facing, particularly with the order cancellations and et cetera. And so, Better Buying has been gathering data on payment and terms among other purchasing practices for a number of years now. And already we have documented that the situation has been challenging prior to COVID-19 for suppliers. And in our data collection in the last quarter of 2019, before any of this was starting, we had already seen globally that 40% of suppliers who were reporting about a particular company's payment and term practices had payment of terms of over 60 days. So that period of time where they're waiting and financing the business was over 60 days. 30% were already reporting not being paid on time, and the average delay was 26 days. 22% were reporting that not all invoices were paid in full, and they were receiving arbitrary reductions of various sorts that couldn't be really blamed on anything that the supplier did. We also measure the amount of working capital that a supplier has tied up with a particular customer's orders at any given time. And in Q4 2019, that average working capital tied up between one buyer and one customer was $10.4 million. So if you can imagine then multiplying by the number of customers a supplier has, you can kind of begin to get a magnitude of the financial vulnerability that that supplier is in at any given time. And then especially when a crisis like COVID-19 starts. So what was already challenging then is just made made worse and even more challenging. So our recent research that was done in May, I'm not even sure the dates now, but just very recently, and end of May, the suppliers reported on specific companies' practices. And 56 of those reports showed that what they were reporting in terms of working capital and the accounts receivable was that really over half of their accounts of their turnover with that particular customer for a year was tied up right then and there in purchase orders and accounts receivable. So over half of that money that they would stand to make from that customer is tied up at this point in time. Now, 62% then reported that accounts receivable is past due. And for many suppliers, all of their accounts receivable with a particular customer was past due. So again, this over half of the annual turnover is tied up and is past due now. 39% had been told that their payment terms were extended for more than 60 days beyond what they already were. So if you had 60-day terms, now you're pushed out 120 days. 69% reported that shipping dates had been pushed back, at least 1 to 2 months, and some indefinitely. And of course, if the ship dates are pushed back, therefore the payment clock doesn't start. 64% said that at least a quarter of their orders had been canceled by the customers, and in some cases, all of the orders of that particular customer had been canceled. And just one more statistic: 60% of those reporting said that worker employment had been impacted, often with layoffs of half of their workforce. And of course, this is affecting the women workers especially. So our research also asked suppliers what kind of payment and term practices ought to be standard practice going forward? What do they need going forward? Is it even possible to continue to finance the way we've been financing, given that there's, this lack of cash flow right now? If a buyer comes along in a month and says, here, I want this order and I'll pay you in 90 days, is that even possible for the supplier to finance anymore? So we really wanted to understand how suppliers would prioritize different payment and terms practices. And we, you might expect, well, the suppliers are going to ask for the very best deal for themselves. But I think that they were really quite reasonable in what they were putting highest priority on. And these things included supplier approval in advance for any reductions that are going to be taken off of an order. Digital settlement, just things that make that payment more efficient. Payment at site with the shipping documents. So, really paying, in some cases deposit, but at least paying at site when the products have been shipped. And late fees for unpaid invoices were some of the highest prioritized payment term standards. So now Better Buying is starting to work with the International Apparel Federation, and it's it's a federation of federations, it's national associations, and we'll be working with them to see if we can't set a standard set of practices. So Better Buying will be, reaching out to suppliers to participate in that process and to have their voice heard. And we just want to extend and urge the suppliers that on the call and listening today to take part in that very important process, so your voice is heard in what kind of payment and term practices you need going forward in this kind of new industry that's going to be developing.
Yeah. So, do you see anything coming from the buyer's side, or are you hearing any changes from the buyer side, or would you like me to move that question to Vipin on that? Sorry, maybe Vipin, can you take the question on how do you see that? Do you see that there will be more visibility in terms of discussing the financial health and the payment turnaround and the payment terms from the retailer side, given the situation that the suppliers have faced currently?
Yeah, sure. I think what has happened because of the retail segmentation, wherever each retailer has been, they've kind of taken different means and modes of, discussing the payments and the whole financial stability with their supply chain. But I guess definitely, I think in the coming time, because the immediate reaction which everyone took, because no one really knew what had hit, they kind of delayed the payment terms, or probably, didn't look at what could be the possible terms to look at. But I think if you see in the last 6 weeks, the retailers have come back. I mean, with the other countries also, they've come back in terms of looking at the financial stability and health of the supply chain and committed to it with different ways and means, and probably looked at different avenues of how they could work together. And this will be a work in progress for a long time, because it has been a challenge in the industry over 20 years, where the payment terms were from LC moved to 30 days LC or site, and then to open account. Now open account has gone up to 150 days also. But now I think the time is that it should start rolling back, and we should have a common understanding of what the supply chain really need. Whether open payment is probably the right thing, but whether it's going to be 30 days, or it's going to be LC, or it's going to be BL assigned to the bank. So things like that, those options probably will come into play definitely in the near future.
Sanjay, I would like to ask, since you are dealing with the multiple countries and you are seeing the payment, the way it is being handled across the different countries, is there something that you would like to share with the viewers about what would be what are the good practices, and how it can be secured, how the payments can be secured by the suppliers?
Yeah, for sure. My thoughts are that, this is a business where nations compete, regions within the nations compete, makers within the region compete. So it is Gurgaon makers versus Tirupur makers. It is, Ho Chi Minh makers versus Hanoi makers. It's India versus Bangladesh. And while it is really, I think it's somewhat wistful to think that the solutions will necessarily come from the buying side. My thoughts are that the nations and their own associations, in working with the makers of these nations, have to figure out and define conditions of doing business which are equitable for all, so that the system cannot be exploited. I think, for example, if I'm talking about having some kind of a one-stop shop where an exporter can go and seek, in terms of solutions, I'm thinking in terms of solutions, a one-stop shop where an exporter can go and seek information on a customer. Likewise, this same one-stop shop can also provide solution to the customer on the credibility of the vendor. For example, if I were to, let's say, if Marsha was willing to sell her car to me, right? Within the next half an hour, I can get a Carfax report, which gives me details of every single thing that has happened to the car from the time it was bought, right? And I've just met Marsha 10 minutes ago. So the question is, why can't, India or Bangladesh figure out, and it has to be a professional kind of an organization. This organization can run with existing institutions in the banking and insurance industry. If I'm an exporter in Bangladesh, let's say I'm XYZ Incorporated, I have an inquiry from a buyer in the US, it would be so nice for me to approach a company, to approach an institution within my country and say, can you tell me about the credibility of this customer? They have the data. Each nation has its own data for each of the importer. I mean, are we really using the data at all? I don't think so. Is the data transparent? I don't think so. The sensitive part of the data in terms of design, in terms of the costing, etc., can all be hidden. But for me to approach an institution and say, give me a credit report on the customer, and I'm willing to pay you $500 for it, and it should come back to me in 6 hours, would be such a great facility. And it can be a it can even be it is not a subsidized body. This organization can run on subscriptions. It can make its own money, and it can charge the customers to seek the same kind of information from on the supply side. I think a lot of the industry, oil industry, dairy industry, there's a lot more transparency and data. I think the apparel industry, in terms of its structure and what the national associations have done, we are still kind of, I think, 20 years behind. And
so on that, Sanjay, I would like to ask that, do you think the government can also help intervene and help on that? Or do you see that it's the international agencies who will be bringing this information?
I clearly think that in an environment where there's so much competition, the solutions have to emerge nationally. So if I'm, let's assume Bangladesh, $25 billion industry. I mean, it is good for me if I were to protect that industry, which provides so much employment. Why can't I create a system? And this has to come from the national governments working with the association in working with the makers. I mean, an institution has to be created to provide this solution. I don't think there is an international solution to it. It has to come nationally, yeah.
It's a very interesting point. And since we are already running out of time, so I'd like to go slightly faster now. We have one more area which we wanted to touch on, which is with the changes that has come up. There is a quantity reduction and still a pressure on the buying buying prices that we are looking at. So I would like to ask that question from Vipin. What do you see, how the quantity reduction and the buying prices, how do you see the changes happening in this area? And what should the manufacturer do to keep up or handle the situation?
Yeah, I think, when we started, Anupam mentioned that, there's going to be a huge consolidation, and that consolidation is definitely going to reduce the buying power. It's going to be more test and trial method that is going to come into the retail industry. What I would say, what we'll have to do is, I think from India point of view, we've always stuck to our niche, which has been the product. I think it's time to stuck to our niche, which is product, and also stuck to a niche, probably get the efficiencies in, and then those reduced quantity or a broader bandwidth of SKUs can be handled better. So that efficiencies will probably put in a lot more work, and probably the whole supply chain will work in that manner to be able to see some kind of returns back. So that reduction will definitely be there, but how do we manage it is what the manufacturers have to slightly think differently. They'll have to definitely put their niche as a product in front, because that's what's going to be the main character that will sell, and then look at the efficiencies that will deal through to kind of marry both of them together.
The similar question I would like to ask Devender also, because he is he's dealing with multiple buyers. How do you see the quantities and the buying prices getting impacted after COVID?
I don't want to say anything about the buying prices, because prices are always been, we are one of the industry which is deflationary by nature. I have never seen the prices going up. So I don't talk about the pricing, but I can definitely comment on the way the business is moving. And again, I would insist to say that the business was always moving in that direction. It's only getting accelerated now, which is that everybody is moving to test and react mode. They want to see what they want to test more, and then they want to buy immediately what is doing well. That is one thing which is happening. Second thing is that e-commerce is becoming bigger and bigger, and the focus on e-commerce is even more prominent than what it was earlier, which means the brands will need a bigger width in terms of what they present to the customer. So if they were buying 10 styles, now they will need to buy probably 50 styles just because of the e-commerce. The third thing which is happening is clearly that the bigger quantities are also getting distributed into a flow quantities. So the customer will come and tell you that I'm going to give you 500,000 pieces of order, but it will be spread into 6 months or 12 months. You will have to plan it. And I will give you a capacity booking, which could be plus minus 20-25% per month. So they are willing. So this is the new reality. And it comes, what any manufacturer needs to, what they need to take away from is being a nimble, having a nimble production units, having more efficient operations where they can move around the things, and instead of having a bigger line, having smaller lines. So that's my 2 bit on what I see happening. And anybody, all I can say is that anybody who is able to adapt themselves to be part of this thought process of buying will definitely win business. And when you are giving something which is in a way unique proposition, I think the price becomes less of a challenge. The price is always a challenge if you are one of the many suppliers. If you have something good to give, there the customer does consider it. They will make sure that they want to work with you.
Okay. As I said, we are really running out of time. So I will quickly go to the questions from the audience. And there is one question coming from Pallav Banerjee saying, how do you see, is there a second wave of COVID coming in? And how do you think the industry should prepare for this threat? I would put this question to Anup. What does he think? How, and reply to this question.
Pallav is always known to ask very straight questions, and I clearly see a second wave of corona coming. And this time again, I don't know about the West, how it is going to behave there, because we see the cases rising even in states like Texas, where Masha comes from. As the economy is opening up, there are more cases, but as India and Bangladesh, especially these two countries, probably will see a much larger number of cases where the factories have to be prepared, both from a standpoint of keeping the supply chain going and financial aspect of it. And I think a lot that has been discussed, I think on the specific, the manufacturers and the customers need to be very financially responsible, because if you look at it, the apparel factories work on a margin of 6 to 8%. No factory, reasonable factory, has a bottom line bigger than that. But if you look at the 90 days terms and 60 days raw material supply chain, you are paying 3 to 5% only on the cost of funding. So where is that money? And certainly factories have to keep a very strong buffer on the working capital side just to tide that over. There's no other way.
Okay. Another question is from Anika Pasi. She's asking, are the Indian producer thinking of adapting any new innovative process which may be different from the other country, what other countries are doing? I would ask probably others to take this question, or anybody else in the panel if they want to come up and take this question.
I'm not sure what Anika is asking in terms of India doing something different vis-a-vis anybody else, because this is a global pandemic and I guess everybody is looking to tighten up their boots. So as we were talking about, there are some fundamental differences, like we were talking about financing, we're talking about factoring agencies, we're talking about credit insurance. Those are the things that need to be tightened up from the India perspective, and where we've actually taken a hit in terms of our move outs, in terms of our cancellations, in terms of the shipments to be held up. So we probably need to find a more sound footing in terms of the contracts that we have with the customers, maybe asking them for a non-recourse factoring right at the time of doing business, looking at credit insurance, and saying today, I mean, the force majeure clause is being used so extensively by every customer, especially in case of a cancellation. It should actually work on both sides. I mean, we should be talking about move outs and an interest cost that the working capital that Mr. Tadai was mentioning to be paid by the customer. So there is going to be a paradigm shift in, I mean, change in terms of how we think and how we negotiate. I'm not so sure how clearly and how effectively we're going to be able to effect these changes between the relationships. But yes, everybody is starting to think in these terms, and as an industry collectively, definitely not as an individual manufacturer, but as an industry, if we push these concepts through, I definitely hope there will be a more equitable relationship between the customers and the manufacturers. I hope I've answered Anika.
Great. There is another question from Prateek Singh. He's saying that we have made industrial cluster. I think he's talking about the workers as per se, that they have moved to places in search of livelihood. So now with the COVID situation and all the social distancing and resetting of the industry, what we are looking at, do you see the clusters moving back to Bihar, Jharkhand, Orissa, or Eastern UP? Since Devender is dealing with multiple suppliers across the countries and across the region, would you like to take that question?
Sorry, I can basically say this, that what we are hearing is two different things depending on who we talk to. You know, one of the some of the people are telling us that there is no issue with labor. You know, they're able to get whatever labor they want, and in any case, there are challenges which are related to how much of the capacity you can use currently. You know, so I think the problem is honestly is that not about labor clusters. It's about whether the labor clusters have facilities where the labor can actually find the work as far as our industry is concerned. If the factories are not there for them to come and join, if they don't have facilities, you know, or they don't have the manufacturing plants there, then those clusters have no meaning. What I mean to say is that whatever, if there are workers who are working in apparel industry, and if they go to a place where there is no apparel industry, then they will have to change their skill set, or they will have to come back to where the apparel industry is situated. So the cluster thing is a thing which I believe is a function of where the business is happening. I think the people who have moved to cluster, they have moved for different reasons. And they have not moved because they were going there for work. They moved there because they felt it was safer for them to be there and to have a livelihood compared to when no work is happening in the clusters where they were getting work.
If I may take part of the question, because as an organization, we do function out of Jharkhand, and I've had the good opportunity to set up the operations there. And just to give you some basic data, yes, having manufacturing where the workers come from is definitely a good thing to do as we look at it. And it, in the long term, is going to reap its benefits. I mean, if I talk of the numbers today, obviously because of the migration issue, we have serious issues in terms of getting manpower to even fill up one shift. I mean, I was talking of 2 shifts earlier. But in Ranchi, where we operate today, my attendance, my absenteeism is close to 3.5%, 4%. All the workers are available to work. And interesting, Devendra was mentioning about skill and skill change. We've taken up the model where we've chosen to train all our workers from zero. So we do not have any experienced people who we've hired, or so the experience so far seems to be pretty positive.
Sorry to interject. I'd like to speak here a little bit. I'm not familiar with the Ranchi operation or whatever you're doing in Jharkhand, but as for Gurgaon, I would like to say that we have not faced any labor shortage. And that is thanks to the good practices that our teams have been following. We are fortunate to have more people wanting to come and work than would we can actually need work with social distancing, because most factories are designed at a 4 feet by 4 feet configuration. Now, if it is going to 6 by 6, virtually you are looking at no more than 50 to 60% capacities. But in the last 60 days of our operation, we were the first ones to start operation in NCR when the factories resumed as early as first week of April without doing any PPE or anything else that was to get the license. We are operating at a much better worker level efficiency than we were actually working with 100% capacity. We are working with 60% of workers. We are operating at 80% of capacity. That means 35 to 40% of the people were actually redundant. And this is what Sanjay and Devinder both mentioned, that the factories have to be more efficient. And honestly, I feel the capacity on the manufacturing side is going to be cut by 50%. So people who can deliver, who can be reliable, there's actually going to be a premium on it.
I'll just take one last question, which is on retailers should start reducing cost of testing samples approval by empowering vendors and accepting in-house reports. And this is from Satish Nayak. And there's another one from Lalit Garg where he's asking, what are the technical tools you can suggest in industry to automate the manufacturing practice, and how to improve capacity utilization or reduce cost? Since we are very short of time now and we are already late. So can I just request Vipin to take this question? As he's also dealing on the supplier, he has a visibility on the retailer and he has the his suppliers to understand what's going on.
I think it's a proven fact wherever suppliers have got in-house laboratories or things like that. There are retailers who are accrediting those laboratories, and in fact, there's a huge movement in terms of empowerment that is coming in play. Do self-sealing. You have self-sealing technician, fit champions, things like that. So there is a lot of movement happening, but I would say it's still very gradual because, as humans, as I started, there's a huge mind shift change that has to happen where people have to let go. Let go is a very difficult thing to do. People have to let go and give that empowerment to the suppliers and bring that transparency and visibility and their trust level, which can probably surface it up. But it's already happening. Big brands are doing it. All brands are into it right now. And especially, I mean, you would know, Smita, Bangladesh is probably working 30% based on this criteria. It's India, which is very, very slow in it. But I think with the big supply chain that we have, where there is facilities there are retailers who are totally for it to go in that direction and cut that, A, cost, B, timelines, everything, and give more empowerment.
One starking question which has been prevailing, I think, in everybody's mind, and we have touched it while addressing the financial health and payment term, but this question is coming again and again from the audience. So I would like to this is the last one for sure. Jatin Lala, he had come up with a question saying that the brands filing bankruptcy, protection, and store closure for many others, what should be the strategy by the suppliers to ensure secure the dealing? And the similar question also came from Gautam Mukherjee, where he said payment terms with vendor needs to be equated to their nominated source, also to level out the financial stress on the supplier. I would like probably Sanjay or Devinder, if you can take this question and give your feedback on it.
Yeah, so I can take up this thing and Sanjay can add on it. First of all, we completely believe that the whole supply chain has to become responsible. The stakeholders have to increase. Everybody has to feel the pain and the pressure. And if they're not, part of the same thinking, then I think we should not be really, looking them as a long-term players. The second thing, which I would say is in terms of the bankruptcy part, I think we all have to understand that we have to understand how does the bankruptcy work. So what happens with the bankruptcy is that any which you're shipping 20 days before the bankruptcy is announced, you will get the money for that. It will be protected. And then up to 6 months, for sure, any order which is placed will also be protected in general. But the risk is there in terms of what you have already shipped and what you are basically about to ship, because what you're about to ship can also get cancelled. So that is the only advice which I can give to the people if they hear about the bankruptcy thing, is to work very closely with their customers and trying to figure out whatever is remaining to be shipped, if they can ship within 20 days of bankruptcy announcement. With that, they will get paid. And then after, any orders which are in pipeline should also be fine. And the ones which they are shipping to customers, or ones which they have already shipped to those customers which are vulnerable, you really have to go and work on the insurance companies, or whatever way you can out how cover, or request your customers, based on the relationship, to release as much as possible. That would be my 2 bit.
Sanjay, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think I alluded to the fact that I think, especially if you look out, next 6 to 12 months time, I think this is a time to really focus on how you manage your capital and resources. I think companies which manage that, both on the retail side and on the supply side, are the ones who are going to win. On bankruptcy, I think my sense is, if a company has declared bankruptcy, the supply side ends up being an unsecured creditor, and there is very little protection left for the supply side. And it doesn't matter whether if you have the LC, whether those LCs are endorsed to the negotiating bank. Nothing really protects the suppliers right now in the case of bankruptcy. And when a company has announced bankruptcy, in terms of thinking at the management level on this side, they're not thinking about the suppliers. They have far more serious issues to think about. And the ship is going down, and people are looking at bailing and jumping. And so I think the solutions have to come, again, locally from within the nations. I think there has to be some sort of tool available to the exporter to de-risk this part of the business. There is no reason why a manufacturer has to also take on the entire responsibility of managing this risk for industries which employ so many people and which bring in so much revenue. I think there has to be institutions within the country to provide them the support to de-risk this process. And the coming months and the next few years are going to be very tough on this front, I think. And unless the solutions come up, and I would, suggest that the leaders in each of these countries, take it up with their associations and figure out a way of defining the norms of payment, so that, everyone can stand together and serve with one defined norm, instead of one cutting into somebody else's payment terms. And because I think there is going to be a lot of pain. There's a lot of pain yet to come. That's my sense.
Thank you, guys. We are now on the closing comments, and I would like to go one by one from each panelist, and request them to give their closing comments on and the takeaways on the what they would like to. How do you see that we can bring about equitable platform and the visibility and in the relationship that we are looking for, because as Sanjay has already mentioned that there's probably more pains that are going to come. So we all have to brace ourselves and be prepared to handle it. And also there has to be a much more deeper relationship that needs to evolve between the retailer and the supplier, so that you can come out of it, or you can float through it together. So in terms of closing comments on these and the takeaways, I would request Marsha to give her statement, as well as just quickly give a update on the transparency dashboard that she has worked on, where she has kind of defined the retailers, how they stand in terms of their credit rating and credit insurance, or the yeah.
Great. Thank you, Smita. Yeah, so Better Buying exists with a mission to transform purchasing practices so that the business relationship between buyers and suppliers is mutually beneficial and sustainable from a 3P point of view: people, planet, and profit. And the way we try to achieve that mission is to use data anonymously submitted by suppliers about specific customers' behaviors and practices. And so that we can bring that transparency about the impacts and practices that kind of stand out against industry norms. You can read our trend reports. You can find those on our website, betterbuying.org. And then we have special reports that we've been doing this spring and into the summer that stem to around purchasing practices related to COVID-19 situation. So what you can't see publicly is the information that we give to brands and retailers that subscribe with us. Right now, probably about 95% of the data we collect is at the request of a brand or retailer who wants to understand how they fare on purchasing practices related to the industry benchmark, and want to be able to see how they can improve and track that improvement over time. So we measure purchasing practices in 7 categories, including planning and forecasting, design and development, cost and cost negotiation, sourcing and order placement, payment and terms, management of the purchasing process, and then also what we call win-win sustainable partnership, which is really about that harmonization of auditing. And the way we measure that is with objective business data that then when we go back the following year, we can see if changes are happening. So it gets really interesting from our point of view in our seat, where we can see the company reports and all the information we're giving to the range of customers and brands and retailers that work with us. And so we've had a number of brands and retailers work with us for a few years now, and we are seeing year-over-year improvements on a number of purchasing practices that matter to suppliers. What we measure are practices that suppliers globally have told us are the most impactful to their business and to their ability to protect workers. And so we are seeing improvements year over year with the brands and retailers that are working with us. So I just want to encourage, you can't see that now as a part of a supplier who's submitting a rating about a particular customer. You will get a scorecard back to see how that customer compared. But this information with greater support of suppliers, where we flip the table and have more like 95% of our data coming proactively by suppliers who submit evaluations of their customers, that begins to form the kind of information that Sanjay is asking for, is let me understand how this customer is to work with in terms of its purchasing practices. We will be able to provide that at some point in the future with greater input. So I would just encourage both the brands and retailers that are listening in to to engage with us and subscribe to get this information and begin that process of improvement for your own benefit as well as your supply chain's benefit, but also for suppliers to be involved in our data collections so that, we can, basically crowdsource the kind of data and information and transparency that Sanjay was talking about needing. Thank you.
Thank you. Vipin?
I think we are all in it, but we are at the same time, we're very closely knitted as a retailer to a supplier to a supply chain. We just have to kind of work together and come out of it with solutions, options that we can work in the coming time. That's what I think would be the game changer for all of us.
Anup, how about
one of the very important points that was brought about to have a rating kind of setup and information system. I know that is the ask, but it may take a very long time. But till such time, I think as NIFTA and all of you present on the seminar and on this panel, I would like that if at least the information that is available can be shared with the vendors, as the buying agencies and people on the buying side and professionals, you have information about vendors you have worked in the past, and not much is going to change. If people have worked in a certain manner in last 10, 15 years, they're not going to change. And similarly, if you have experience on the brands, please share with the vendors, because I'm sure if a customer has acted in a good manner, they are likely to act in a good manner in a different situation. And if a customer has acted in a manner which is predatory to the whole system, they are not going to change. There are some characters that is not going to change. So I think with the limited information we have, all of us in the medium to short term can at least protect whatever is left out of the manufacturing base.
Devender, you would like to express something?
Yeah, I second what Anup said. I think we are always trying to share the information transparently. And the only thing which I would add on what Anup said is that it's also very, very critical that we push the whole supply chain. When I say we, means I mean to say from the buying officer's point of view, we have to push all the fabric suppliers, trim suppliers, other subcontractors, the customers. Everybody has to be on the same page. We win together or we lose together. That has to be the approach, and that is a must. It's something which we have to implement. That's all I will say.
Adarsh, you would like to express your views on?
Yeah, short and sweet. It's been too long, but under the present situation, I would say cash needs to be conserved. We need to look at ways of getting leaner, slimmer, more efficient, and the interconnectedness of this industry, the entire supply chain, is so much, and they're so intertwined that at this point in time, whatever we need to do to get to the new normal, we need to do it together and plan for the unknown.
Thank you. Sanjay?
Yeah, my thoughts are that the industry has survived many crises in the past. This is not the first one they're facing. There was the crisis of compliance at one point in time, and before that, when 2007-8, the financial crisis. So I think there is no doubt in my mind that the industry will survive and eventually thrive again. But I think the next few years are the years of caution, and I think the survival of the fittest, I think, is what's going to happen. And I wish everyone good luck.
Thank you. So I would like to hand over now back to Didi for the closing comments and the announcements. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. It was actually quite engaging listening, and possibly this is one of the longest webinars we've had, but there's so much ground to cover. It's a complex subject. What came across very strongly, I think, and very clearly was that there is a need for the industry to get lean, clearly, on the buyer side, on the supplier side. There's a lot of fat, there's a lot of fluff that we've collected over the years. And it is time for a transformation to become leaner in terms of processes, in terms of people, in terms of technology being used. Secondly, I think transparency, and this is a theme which was repeated again and again and again, unless we make things more transparent, and I think the onus now is on the buyers to make things more transparent and for the suppliers to be able to see through what they're dealing with. So far, the industry has dealt with in a one-sided manner where the supplier has, given more transparency to their factory and their supply chain and followed compliances of all sorts. It is now time for the buyers actually to face a similar scrutiny. And the third element, I think, which again came across, spoken by various panelists, was trust. Without trust, without acknowledging the fact that we all stand together, this industry will perish. It is a difficult time, and I think that time will remain difficult. While there have been lots of crises earlier, I think this is unique in terms of the combination of things which are affecting the industry at the moment. And there is a transformation which is going on, whether we realize it, whether we acknowledge it or not. So I think there is much food for thought in this session. There are certain points which have come up, I think, which we will take up in future sessions as well. There is certainly the element of technology. There is the element of manufacturing and being competitive across different regions. So I think these are definitely two subjects we have identified for future webinars. Thank you so much, all of you, all the panelists, for joining together. And I think all of the people who are joined in from across the world listening to the webinar, I hope you've gained as much as certainly I have listening to these illustrious industry people. Thank you again, and please stay tuned, subscribe to the NIFTA channel so that you don't miss any alert on the future sessions that are coming up. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.